year of graduate study in spacecraft design at the Moscow Aviation Institute in Moscow, Russia. Prior to joining the Artemis program, Mr. Hartwell was a project manager in NASA, International Space Station Program Office, specializing in managing joint engineering projects. Major projects include managing the technical cooperation required for NASA to transport the recent-built Blastbelt module on Space Shuttle Atlantis and robotically install it into the space station. Over the last few years, William has held the key role of NASA Orion program liaison to the European Space Agency during the design and development of the European Orion service model. As such, he has been an integral member of NASA management team working with AGA and Airbus to resolve programmatic and technical change related to the provision of European service module to NASA for the Artemis mission. Mr. Hartwell is also the NASA Orion program lead for negotiation with AGA regarding the future Orion program cooperation. So, Mr. Hartwell, please, floor is yours.
Thank you. So, I'd like to start us off with a question. What is the one place that nearly everyone on Earth has seen? When I was a young engineer, just starting out in the astronaut office at NASA in Houston, I was walking around, getting familiar with my surroundings, and I came across the office of astronaut John Young. John Young was an Apollo astronaut, later became the first commander of the very first shuttle mission. He was still working at the agency as a senior advisor. And as I'm standing in the doorway looking into his office, on the wall was a photograph of John Young standing in the one place that nearly everyone on Earth has seen. He was standing on the moon. 12 humans have walked on the surface of the moon. 12. Today, I'll be sharing with you our plans to go together into space, to the moon, to learn how to live off of planet Earth so that we can learn how to survive on Mars. My colleague and friend from the European Space Agency was here in November telling you about the Artemis program. I'm going to share with you the specifics of Artemis 1. The next slide, please. So Artemis, as my colleague Guillermo Gonzalez shared with you, is our plan, is our program with international and corporate partners, to go back to the moon, this time not as a destination. So in the 1960s and 70s, the American space program with NASA went to the moon as a destination and then to come back. Now we are going together with international partners, with commercial partners. But we're not going as a destination in itself. We're going as a waypoint, as a way to get to Mars, to learn how to live off planet Earth. Next slide, please. And push the button one more time. You lose the projector.
Our return to the moon will be different than the last time. We plan to explore more of the moon surface.
The space system is now counting down to liftoff of Orion and its maiden voyage to the moon. And here we go. The spacecraft is barreling its way back home after circumnavigating the moon and beyond in an elliptical distant retrograde orbit. Splashdown. Orion back on Earth.
Okay, so going to deep space, what does that mean? So imagine I have a basketball here that I'm holding in my hands, and we'll pretend it's the model of the Earth. The low Earth orbit is about 1 centimeter off the surface of this basketball. This is a location where the International Space Station. So as operators, you must appreciate when you are somewhere away from your support network, how long will it take you to return if there's a problem? This slide will tell you the differences of low Earth orbit, the moon, and later we'll talk about Mars. But you see, it takes about 3 hours to get home to planet Earth if you have a very bad day. And everything is failing, and there's no option but to leave. 3 hours, and you are safely on planet Earth with the support network coming to help you. It's about 400 kilometers that you return from. Your spacecraft enters at about 28,000 kilometers an hour. Your heat shield that is protecting you on your reentry, the heat of the heat shield gets up to about 1,700 degrees centigrade. Next slide. So let's talk about the moon. In the same model where you have a basketball in low Earth orbit, the International Space Station is 1 centimeter off the surface. The moon is 10 meters away. So it's basically against the wall over there. And it's about the size of a tennis ball. Basketball Earth, the moon about the size of a tennis ball, 10 meters away. 3 days. So your systems need to be very robust, very reliable. You have to have many backup plans because in order to get, no one's coming to help you, right? Your systems are failing, you have to get 3 days. Very different mission. Also notice that the heat, the speed at which you're coming in is much higher. And so the demands on your spacecraft are much higher, for 40,000 kilometers an hour. And the heat of the heat shield, already we're talking 2,800 degrees Celsius. So it's a very demanding, extremely demanding. Next slide. Mars in the same scenario, basketball, 1 centimeter off the surface with the International Space Station, moon, tennis ball, over up against the wall. Mars, in this case, is about the size of a volleyball and is about 1.5 kilometers away. So the mission, I would like you to appreciate the mission and the challenges of the mission. It is very demanding. And you're talking incredible length of time to get back. No one's coming to help you. You can't afford it, right? So the heat and the speed are a little higher. See, 43,000 kilometers an hour, not a lot. The big jump from low Earth orbit to the moon is the jump in, mostly the jump in speed and the heat of your heat shield. The jump to Mars is time. Next slide. So my colleague from the European Space Agency was here in November. He described a lot about the Artemis program. I'm going to share little bits of that for you just to give you the context. There are many elements required to go to the moon. These are some of them. These are the main ones. Space Launch System is the rocket we're using. The Orion spacecraft just sits on top of the rocket. It carries the people, 4 astronauts. We need a landing system to get to the lunar surface. So the Orion spacecraft, which I work for the Orion program, cannot land on the moon. We need a separate, it's not designed to do this. So we have a human landing system, and we're partnering with SpaceX for this. The Orion spacecraft, we're partnering with the European Space Agency. So it's all about partnerships. It's all about how we go together. And then Guillermo Gonzalez also told you about the Gateway Space Station. I won't speak much about that one today. So it is a critical part about us going to the moon. We have many international partners on that. European Space Agency, the Japanese, the Canadians, next slide. So here's some pictures, some things you probably saw from Guillermo's presentation. The Space Launch System, you can see up close view of it, and then the Orion spacecraft. Orion spacecraft has many components to it. We'll talk more about that on some other slides, but you can see there it is sitting on top of the rocket. Okay, next slide. So the Space Launch System is based on the Space Shuttle. Many of the components and technologies from the Space Shuttle program, we are using them on the Space Launch System. The boosters on the side, the 2-side boosters, they are 5 segments each, and they provide most of the thrust. So 75% of the thrust comes from these boosters in the first 2 minutes of flight. So it's an incredible force that happens at that time. Then there's 4 engines called the RS-25 engines that are also from the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle had 3 of these on the back of the Space Shuttle itself. And the Space Launch System has 4, and they are underneath what we call the core stage, which is the central part with the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. And then we have an upper stage as well. Next slide, please. So this shows you a little more detail on the Orion spacecraft, and I know Guillermo showed you something similar to this, but again, it's good for context. There's the launch abort system, the crew module in the center. That's the only part that returns. And then we have the service module, which most of the service module is made by the European Space Agency. The service module provides the solar panels that generate all the electricity for the spacecraft. Also provides the oxygen and the water for the crew. And the launch abort system, I'd like you to pay attention to this one because I have some video of during the launch, there's a particular phase where the launch abort system is critical for saving the crew if there's a problem with the rocket. But after a while, you can abort to orbit. Space operations is all about managing, like most operations, managing what will I do at this time if I have a problem. Okay, now the situation has changed. What will I do with this new situation? And so we protect for every phase of flight. And the launch abort system protects for when you're sitting on the launch pad, and it protects for when you are in your first maybe 8 minutes of flight. And then we have to get the launch abort system off because it's heavy and it's not going to help us anymore, so we get rid of it. And you'll see some video of what we call the jettison, so when we get rid of the launch abort system. Next slide, please. So there's 4 astronauts. The Orion spacecraft can carry 4 astronauts. There are 4 windows up in the front, so the only ones that can see out those windows are the 2 at the top. There's also a window through the hatch, and so these astronauts can see through that a bit, not much. We carry about enough supplies for 21 days. So if you want to go for longer, you have to dock with something that gives more supplies and more space. For 21 days, everything the astronauts need, toilet, exercise, food, oxygen, water, it's all there. 21 days, 4 people. And Guillermo also shared this with you as well. So the European Space Agency is a critical partner for the Orion spacecraft. And 10 nations within the European Space Agency cooperate and provide components for the European service module. And Spain provides the thermal control unit. It's a CRISA that provides this electronics box that maintains the thermal control of the spacecraft. And that's very challenging because in space, you have, on one side of the spacecraft, you can have the sun. And on the other side, only a meter away, you have deep space, and it's minus 200 degrees Celsius. And in the sun, it's plus 200 degrees Celsius. So the range, it's very demanding. And the spacecraft is metal, and it has to, and the people inside have to, stay around 25 degrees Celsius. And so it's very demanding for a thermal control system. And CRISA provides the thermal control unit that controls that. Next slide. So I know my colleague also shared this, but this is the mission that I'll be sharing a lot of details about. We launched in November, and we went in a very complex orbit around the moon. We came out on that green line. We did a quick slingshot. So we came very close to the surface of the moon. You'll see photographs of where the moon looks very large and the Earth looks very small. That's when we were in that little loop, in that green loop coming around the moon. And then we went around the outside, and we went to what's called a distant retrograde orbit, very far away from the moon. So you'll see pictures where the moon is almost the size of the Earth, but the moon is closer. So the moon is larger than the Earth, but only a little bit. That's the farthest any human-rated spacecraft has ever been from planet Earth. So we set records on this particular mission. And then we slingshot around again on the blue line. And so we come in again for a low lunar pass, and then follow the blue line all the way down to landing. Now, we have plans for communication systems that will allow us to communicate to satellites that can relay our signal from the spacecraft to Earth. But these are not, we don't have them yet. This is in our plans. So anytime that the spacecraft went on the back side of the moon, there was no communication with Earth. It was completely silent. So we could not communicate with the spacecraft. Next slide. Okay, so now a lot of pictures here, a lot of photographs of the building of Artemis 1. So this is the pressure shell of it's a capsule, but this is what it looks like, the part that holds the pressure and the astronauts are inside. The rest of it is additional equipment, and it doesn't need to be inside. So you can see the 4 windows here. You can see a tunnel. The tunnel eventually will be used. We'll put a docking mechanism on the top, and we'll dock. On the 3rd mission, we'll be docking with the human landing system. So the astronauts can climb out of the Orion and get into the human landing system. So you can see the tunnel that they'll go through. Next slide. This is the European service module. It's designed by the European Space Agency. The prime contractor is Airbus Defence and Space in Germany. And then they have lots of subcontractors. CRISA, as I mentioned, is the subcontractor from Spain. And it has all the four tanks that you see sticking up, and the one in the middle. The four on the outside there are all the fuel and oxidizer. So that's the propulsion. And the central tank is a pressure tank that pushes, it's a tank, high pressure tank of helium, and it pushes the fuel and the oxidizer through the system. It's not pumped, it's pressure fed. Next slide. So here's what it looked like when we had assembled the service module. So there's no crew module sitting on top, it's just a service module. And it's got more parts to it, the parts that connect it to the European service module is the part right in the middle, the smallest diameter part. The other parts are connected to the crew module and to the rocket. Next slide. This is the crew module after it has been completely assembled, and now we're testing. So what you see this picture is, now when you launch something and you're designing something for space, you have to design it for the environment that it's going to be used in. And one of the most extreme environments is launch. Launch has a lot of, we call it shake, rattle, and roll. So lots of vibration. And that comes from both mechanical vibration of the rocket itself, but also from the acoustic noise, just the sheer noise power. And what happens is the noise of the rocket bounces off the ground and comes back up and hits the spacecraft. And so what you see here are speakers, like in a rock concert. And we are blasting the heck out of this spacecraft to test it. We're checking it for that it can withstand those kind of vibrations. We also did the same thing with the service module. So we did the crew module separately, service module separately, and then we assembled them. Next slide. So here is the assembled spacecraft, where you see the crew module sitting on top, and the service module down below. And now the solar panels are attached. And there are 4 of them, and we call them solar array wings. And they come out like an accordion. There's 3 panels, and they fold up. And they're folded up right now. And as you can see, there are these fairings that are around the sides. Those come in and cover the solar panels during launch because of the acoustic noise vibration. We cover these to protect the solar panels. And something I would like to show you is so right here is a camera. Here is a camera. And these are very important. I want to draw your attention to. Many of the images we have from our mission are from those cameras. On the tips of the solar array wings are cameras. They're GoPros, actually. And so I want to draw your attention to it because there are many of the images and video you will see later in the presentation are from those cameras. And then these here, as I said, are the fairings that wrap around to protect the spacecraft during launch. Okay, next. This is the Space Launch System, the core stage, the part that goes in the middle. It is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, and it has four main engines on the bottom. These are engines from the shuttle program, the main engines from the shuttle program. Next slide. This is stacking of the side boosters. They are 5 different segments that come together. And we have a very large building called the Vehicle Assembly Building, and we stack them. You can see them being assembled here. The first segment is down on top of the nozzle and then continued stacking. There are 5 segments. Next slide. Here you can see there have been, much of them have already been stacked together. Next slide. Here's the final cone going on one of the boosters. Next slide. Now you can see the boosters are stacked and we're ready for the core stage to be installed down the middle. The next slide. Here comes the core stage being lowered into place. Next slide. Now, then there is a upper stage. Here is the upper stage being lifted to be placed into here, and here you can see the upper stage is being placed on top of the rocket. And on top of the upper stage, we put in the spacecraft. Next slide. Meanwhile, while the Space Launch System is being assembled in the vehicle assembly building, the Orion spacecraft we've now put the launch abort system on top of it, and we have added all the fuel, all the oxygen, all the water, prepared it for launch. And so now it's rolling out to the vehicle assembly building. Next slide. Now you can see we're lowering it down, setting it on top of the rocket. Next slide. And here we go. The complete, we call it the stack. It's fully stacked. We have the boosters, we have the core stage, we have the upper stage, we have the spacecraft on top. Okay, next. And so we roll it out of this building. This is the vehicle assembly building. It was built in the 1960s for the Apollo program. It's the same one that the Apollo rockets came from. We're rolling it out to the launch pad for testing. Next slide. The crawler is an amazing piece of engineering just by itself. At full speed, it's like 2 kilometers an hour. I mean, but it can move incredible lengths, and it itself is very heavy. It's the same ones we used in the Apollo program. They've been refurbished. Next slide. So just some pretty pictures here as we put it out onto the launch pad. Next slide. And then we did what was called wet dress rehearsal, where you do everything all the way up until the moment before you start the engines. So you pressurize it, you fill it with fuel. That's the big thing. Liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen. Liquid hydrogen is really challenging to deal with because it is very, very cold and the molecules are very small. And so any tiny little leak can cause lots of problems. Took us many attempts to get that working. Next slide. So this picture is just a really incredible moment to capture. It's where we're headed, sitting right there, big as life. When we were giving this presentation earlier, one of the astronauts joked and said, when you come up on an elevator here, and you walk along this path to go to the rocket, and then this is what's called the white room, and the people are there to help you climb into the spacecraft and suit you, put you in there, and they strap you in. And he joked, he said, you just have to make sure that when you get here, you turn to the right and go into the spacecraft, and you don't turn to the left and go out this door. Okay. So now some video from the mission. So fairing separation. So this is what I talked to you about with these cameras. There were 4 cameras, one in each of these locations here, and then 2 on the other side as well. So what you were going to see is what these cameras were seeing when the fairings were covering goes down. And you'll see all four cameras at the same time, and you'll see the fairings break away, and you'll see them disappear, but then you see them reappear at the bottom when the light hits them again and the thrust from the rocket hits them. And so just wanted to tell you what you're getting ready to see, so it's very complicated. Yeah. Oh, closer to the mic. Okay. Is that better? A little bit of an echo. All right. Okay, so we're going to go now to the next slide. And yeah. And I think it will run again. We'll just watch it one more time. There the fairings break away, and then you see them get hit by the thrust from the engines of the rocket. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the launch abort system. As I mentioned, it sits on top, and we have to get it off of the rocket so that we can lose the weight and keep going faster. But the problem is that it has to come off the rocket and get out of the way. And so imagine you're sitting in the rocket on your back and you're looking out the window. We do have one mannequin on this flight, and you'll see. So you'll get a sense of where the pilot or the commander would sit. And the launch abort system jettisons off in front of you and then luckily moves out of the way. All right, next slide. And you might want to turn the lights off again. So this is the view. Yep, that's a view out one of the windows. There's the jettison motors, and it'll go again. You'll see it here. So you are traveling extremely fast. You are not, it looks like we're sitting still, but we're not. We're traveling extremely fast. And this jettison motors take the thing away even faster. All right. Next slide. Okay, now I mentioned that the solar array wings have the cameras on them, and so they are closed up, and the fairings come off, and we've seen that. And then what happens is the solar array wings, they extend, and so this is the video during the extension, and so it's an accordion, and you can see them come out and latch. Next slide. I'm going to turn the lights off again. This is a very, very important phase of the flight. If these solar array wings do not come out and fully latch and lock, then you have to abort and come home. So, as a crew member, you're counting on these things latching. See if you can push play one more time. I don't know if you can. Yeah, good. If they don't latch, then they can flop around and they can come back and hit the spacecraft and damage it. So that's why you have to abort and come home if they don't latch. So this is a critical part of this next stage of going on to the moon. Okay, next slide. All right, here's the upper stage. This is pretty straightforward. The upper stage on this flight launched us to the moon. So it gave us the thrust to start on our way to the moon, and then we got rid of the upper stage, and this is the separation. Next slide. There are pyro bolts that fire. And you can see the thrusters. You see the upper stage falling away. Watch the thrusters up at the top. You'll see them fire. Watch right there. See them? That's to provide separation from the upper stage. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is, we are just leaving, getting ready to leave the Earth. The upper stage is separated, and we're on our way to the moon. The Earth is starting to get small. Next slide. Now, there's a lot of things going on in the capsule. I want you to notice we have here, so we have a mannequin, and the mannequin has many sensors on it so that we can get a sense of the loads that the astronauts will feel. Right? You have to understand how many G's will the astronaut feel in different phases of the flight. We also have this here. This is Snoopy. Snoopy is our zero G indicator. So when he starts to float, you know that you're in 0 G. And when you'll notice on re-entry, you'll notice that Snoopy all of a sudden starts to pull very tightly. He's on a string. So you can watch him, and you can easily see when you have zero gravity and when you have lots of when you're pulling lots of G's. Okay, next slide. We're getting ready to pass around the moon. So these are our images from the solar array wings, and so they vibrate a little bit because the wings are very long. So it looks like it's shaking. It's because they're on the tips of the wings. But we're getting ready to pass right behind the moon during our slingshot. And so as soon as the Earth disappears behind the moon, we will have no communication with the spacecraft. Next slide. This is the farthest point we've ever been away from any human-rated spacecraft has ever been away from the Earth. So 432,000 kilometers from Earth. You can see that the moon is larger than the Earth because it's between us and the Earth. Next slide. This was our slingshot around the moon the second time. The images are just amazing. The GoPro cameras do an amazing job of providing lots of detail. Okay, next slide. That's just a few moments later, and we're coming, that's the Earth right here. All right. That's the Earth. So we're coming around the outside, around the moon for the last time, and the Earth appears. And so all of a sudden we have communication again with the spacecraft. Next slide. Okay, here's re-entry. This is the most dangerous phase of the mission. Because you can't, there aren't very many abort scenarios. There aren't many things you can do besides continue to re-enter. All right, next slide. So, and one more. So, as I mentioned, you're coming in 40,000 kilometers an hour from the moon. Your heat shield is going to get to 2,800 degrees. You're laying on your back. So, you're laying on your back and you're facing this direction. And so, what's happening is there is the air that is heating up around on the heat shield is getting very hot and comes around the outside of the spacecraft, and it becomes ionized. And you will see in the video, you'll see the views that the astronauts will have looking out this direction. And so I wanted to give you that sense that you're not looking this direction, you're looking this direction. Next slide. This is sped up. Watch Snoopy. Snoopy's floating. And then all of a sudden, the G-forces begin when you start to re-enter. Boom. And then it really starts pulling hard on it. See him how he's shaking there? You can barely see him. And the ionized atmosphere is coming around the spacecraft. Okay, next slide. Okay, listen. Now this is interesting. This is looking out the window. This is the ionized atmosphere coming around. You will hear the reaction control thrusters. This is what we actually have audio, so listen carefully. You will hear the reaction control thrusters fire. And it will start to bank. So that's probably the best experience you're going to have of what it's going to be like on reentry. I will play it one more time because it's the experience the astronauts will have flying the spacecraft, and it's in the most dangerous phase of the mission. And the spacecraft begins to bank because we come into the atmosphere and we do a bit of this to slow down. So let's see if we can play. See if we can play it one more time. Good. And you'll see lots of black specks coming off and hitting the window. This is the parts of the heat shield that are coming off and hitting the window. That's your heat shield that's burning away. Supposed to. Next slide. Okay, so you've re-entered, your heat shield has done its job. Now the parachutes need to do their job. And there are lots of parachutes. There's 11 of them. I won't go through all of them, but you'll see many of them. And so let's watch the parachutes deploy. This is looking up through the hatch window. Next slide. You can hear the mortars fire that shoot the parachutes out. You cut the parachutes when we go for the next parachute. These are the mains. The mains are now opening. And as soon as they fill with air, we then open them further. You'll see them, now they're filled, and now they're open again. See how big they get? They get very big. Okay, next slide. And then the splashdown. And the Navy is responsible for retrieving the spacecraft and the astronauts. Next slide. So there are five bags that inflate balloons that inflate. In case the spacecraft flips upside down, because it'll happily float upside down. So you'd be sitting there strapped into your seat, facing down and bobbing around, except can't get out because the hatch is underwater. And so these balloons, they inflate, and they don't all inflate at one time. They inflate on one side, and then a few moments later, they inflate on the other side. And that's because if it's upside down, then if you inflate all of them at one time, then it just goes straight up, and you haven't helped yourself. So we inflate a couple of the balloons, and it will begin to turn, and then you inflate the others, and it'll keep going. Next slide. Okay, so this was an incredibly successful mission for being a first-time flight. We generated a lot more power than we expected, which is very helpful because that gives us some reserve. And we used a lot less power than we expected. So overall, we have a lot of reserve power, which is very important because that's one of your main resources. We flew 2.2 million kilometers, so it was an extremely long flight. And the most important thing for us is that we achieved so many test objectives, right? This was a test flight. And so we did 161 different tests. And the things were going so well that we actually asked the team to, during the mission, to please come up, please figure out some other tests that we can run. And we did. We ran an additional 21 tests we had never imagined because of the spacecraft was doing so well. And so that's really success, right? In a test flight, you want to be able to test it. And that's what we were able to do. We were able to meet all of our objectives and then some. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of my final slides. You can see NASA, European Space Agency. This is a historic picture. Next slide. So that was Artemis 1. Right here, a full test. We've had several other tests coming up, but to get to Artemis 1. Artemis 2 is the next mission where we'll fly with astronauts. First time with astronauts. We'll go around the moon. And then Artemis 3 is our lunar landing. Next slide. So this is the Artemis 2 mission. My colleague from European Space Agency, I think, shared the same slide. It's just a quick, free return trajectory around the moon. It's a very safe trajectory. We're testing the life support systems. On the first mission, we didn't test any life support systems. This time, we have the astronauts. We will do a complete loop around the Earth before we decide to go to the moon. We will test all the life support systems because, as I mentioned, it's 3 days. If you're here and you have a problem, you're many days to get home. No other option. So we will test the life support systems in this loop, and then we will commit to go to the moon. Next slide. These are the astronauts that have been chosen for this mission. Christina Cook, Victor Glover, Jeremy Hansen, and Reed Wiseman. Jeremy is a Canadian astronaut, I think an F-18 pilot. And, so these are the 4 people that will fly around the moon in 2024. Next slide. Artemis 3, a couple of slides here on Artemis 3, that's our first lunar landing. It's a very different mission. You fly to the moon, and then you get into a very different orbit. You go in this orbit here. And the purpose is to get to the lunar South Pole. You can see we come up and we land on the lunar South Pole. The lunar South Pole has lots of water ice, and so we want to be able to land on the South Pole. The Apollo program only went to the equator of the moon, and there's no ice there. So we were trying to get to the poles of the moon. Next slide. As I mentioned, we've partnered with SpaceX to develop the human landing system. And so you'll see this in the news, and you should be watching because they're testing their super heavy booster and the Starship spacecraft. This is a complete game changer. This is, I was telling the gentleman before when we were meeting earlier that I used to laugh a little bit at when I'd hear SpaceX ideas. And certainly I would laugh at these ideas. But I have stopped laughing. They are making amazing progress. And many times I get the question, are we competing with SpaceX? And I can tell you, absolutely, we are not competing. We are counting on SpaceX being successful because they are providing the lunar lander for Artemis 3 and 4. So you can see how large it is. It's really quite an amazing rocket. It's reusable. So both the booster and the Starship part up there are both reusable. They fly back and land they land and they get caught by this Mechazilla, they call it. Next slide. So on Artemis 3, we will dock the Orion spacecraft. You can see how big the Starship lunar lander is. We will dock to the Starship in lunar orbit. So the Starship will go to lunar orbit, and the Orion spacecraft will go to lunar orbit. And we will dock. And 2 astronauts will leave the Orion, 2 will stay inside the Orion, 2 will go into this Starship, and then they will land on the lunar surface. Now, you probably can't see it very well, but these right here, those are people. So that's the exit from the Starship, and there's an elevator that takes you to the lunar surface. So this is like saying, I'm offering to go camping with you, and I say, can you please make a trailer that we can stick on the back of my car, and we'll go off and we'll go camping. And you say, a trailer? Well, how about I bring an 18-wheeler transfer truck? Would that be okay? Okay. The amount of things you can carry and bring with you is just, you have to change your complete mindset on how this is going to work. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of my last slides. On the internet you can see many examples of watching the launch, but what I followed my father's advice. I was at the launch with my son, and he said, if I was there, I wouldn't video the launch. I'd video the people watching the launch. Because you can get copies of the film of the launch many places. So that's what I did. This is so that you'll get a first-hand experience. Unfortunately, the audio isn't very isn't as effective as it should be for you to get the sense of the launch. But what I want you to notice, a couple of things. One, this is at 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's pitch dark outside. They turn off the lights right before launch so that we can appreciate the brightness from the rocket. By the time the rocket is up, I don't know, about like this in the sky, it is so bright, it looks like 10 o'clock in the morning. And it literally turns night into day. You can see the color of the grass. Look for the color of the grass. You can see that it's green. It's green grass. And then the next thing I'd like you to look for is my son, who's sitting beside me. And I'm filming him. And when the sound waves begin to hit him, I give him 2 warnings that the sound waves are coming. I said, you'll see my head turn like this. And I talk to him. I say, the sound is getting ready to hit us. And then I tell him one more time, the sound is getting ready to hit us. Watch the expression on his face when the sound begins to hit us. Because you won't be able to appreciate it from this sound. But it hits your chest. And it is very emotional. And you can see that in his face. So let's watch the video. o'clock in the morning. So the main message is we are going back to the moon, going to the moon. And this time we're going together. And it's going to be amazing. History is getting ready to take a turn. And we're all going to experience it. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Luis, wait.
What is the biggest challenge or the biggest problem you have to solve to get a human to Mars?
To Mars, the biggest challenge is the time. Because you go and the effects on the people. It's the reliability of the systems. The systems have to be extremely reliable. So you have to have a system and a backup system and a backup of the system. Because the abort, the opportunity to turn around you're just months and months away. And a round trip to Mars is like 2 years, minimum. So it's the reliability of the systems, and it's the challenge, the human challenge of isolation, being in a small space, and then the radiation that you could get from that long duration. You have to find ways to protect the human body. Those are the challenges. It's not easy. It's like I said, basketball, International Space Station, 1.5 kilometers is Mars. It's not easy.
I have two questions. The first one would be, how is this starship able to provide warmth in the space? I'm curious about that. I mean, I don't know if it is condensing the warmth in the space, if that exists, or it reutilizes the water that the human body deploys just by functioning. And the second would be, I mean, if travel to Mars means months of traveling, I don't know if in the future the NASA is thinking about deploying different space bases around the space or something like that in order to a starship. So a starship is able to resupply in every station. So the Mars trip is possible, because otherwise, if a starship like the current one is only able to survive for 20 days in space, how is possible to go to Mars? That's my questions.
Yeah. Yes, so in order to go to Mars, we have to have what's called regenerative life support systems. Because, you know, we individually use about 100 liters of water a day. And we don't really think about it. On the space station, they use about 5 liters of water a day. But that's, and there's some regeneration. On the space station, we take the urine and recycle it and turn it into water, purify it, turn it into water, and then we can use that for generating oxygen to breathe. But you have to have closed loop life support systems. And this technology is very helpful for the Earth as well, for our life on Earth. Because think about disaster recovery scenarios where you have like a hurricane or a landslide or wildfires, and then the water systems are polluted and can't be used, or the water systems are broken and can't be used. And so the ability to recycle a small amount of water and continue to reuse it and reuse it and reuse it is also useful on Earth. That technology is very important. And more with the changing climate, we're going to have more and more likely to have more and more disasters, humanitarian disasters. So I think that was the first question, was life support systems recycling. And so we do recycle on the space station, but our systems need to be even more reliable than what we have on the space station. They break now and then, and we have to repair them. We bring spare parts from the Earth. And if you're that far out, then it's hard to bring spare parts. Now, as far as creating stopping points along the way, it's kind of like saying, well, I'm going to go to sail from here to the United States. Why don't I put some places along the way? You can do it, but we don't. Because, I mean, no one ever has put an artificial waypoint out in the middle of the Atlantic to stop and get resources from. Now, the moon provides some of that, right? Because we can get water from the moon. There's water on the poles. The reason we're going to the poles is because the sun shines just like here on Earth. The sun comes at a very sharp angle to the poles. So it doesn't shine down like this on the poles. It shines like this on the equator. And the poles, it comes in at an angle. And on the moon, there are craters, all over the moon, craters. And when the crater is on the equator, it gets sun comes in. But on the poles, there's places that have never, ever seen the sun, ever. The crater was created billions of years ago. It's still there. Never has there been sun. And we found there's water ice in those craters. So that's why we're going to the poles, to get the water ice, to have a fueling station in space, to learn how to get that water, use that water. You can break it into oxygen and hydrogen. You can breathe the oxygen. You can use the hydrogen as rocket fuel. So it's enormously useful to have that stopping point, if you will.
You say that one of the members of the crew is a Canadian F-18 pilot. What are the career of the other members, or how they fit into the team?
I think the question was, we have European Space Agency as a partner. Who are our other partners? Is that your question?
Yes.
Currently, we have the Japanese Space Agency called JAXA. They are cooperating with us on the Gateway, which is a space station we're going to put around the moon. We also have the Canadian Space Agency. They're going to provide a robotic arm for the gateway. This is, again, the space station that we will dock to around the moon. And then the European Space Agency. And we have some other partners that are coming on that haven't been announced yet, but we have a new partner that will be providing an airlock for the gateway so that you can do spacewalks on the gateway. And so those are our current partners internationally. The European Space Agency has 22 member states, so there's lots of different members that participate, countries that participate through the European Space Agency. But we have many countries that are beginning to sign what's called the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords is an agreement that you agree to, if you go to space, you agree to a set of rules of how you will behave and how you will inform others of what you're doing so that you don't impact what they're trying to do. And so we have many countries now that have signed the Artemis Accords. It's not an agreement to cooperate, it's an agreement to operate by a set of rules. And so we're creating the environment for many countries to participate. If you wanted, for example, the docking mechanism that connects the Orion spacecraft with the human landing system and the gateway, the docking mechanisms, that information on the size, the shape, the standards for connecting, just like I have a USB stick that's made, you know, in China, but I use it in Brazil, or I use it in Europe, or I use it in America. It's all the same USB standard. And so that's what we're doing, we're creating standards for docking mechanisms so that other partners can also build them and can come and participate.
I think what the student was asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, is actually when we're talking about the crew itself, the composition of the crew and what specialties the crew has available for the
Got it. So as far as partners, when it comes to having astronauts join on these missions, the way it works is that it's like, imagine we have a party, and I'm going to invite many people to come to my party. Let's say that it's an American party and we're going to have hamburgers. So I have a grill. I say, well, I'm going to provide the grill. Grill's a pretty expensive thing. Someone else may bring hot dogs or the hamburgers. So let's say you bring the hamburgers. And the hamburgers cost, they're not cheap, but it certainly doesn't cost as much as providing a grill. So then we start to share the hamburgers. And most of the hamburgers will come to me because we're throwing everything into the bucket of our party. And yes, you're going to have some hamburgers, but not as many as you brought. So it's the same thing with partnership in space, is that every partner brings something, and the partners that bring the most get the most benefits from the party. And so astronaut flights are one of those benefits. And so currently, the Canadians we've agreed to fly one astronaut from Canada in our partnership that we've created so far. There's more opportunity as we do more and more complex things when we go to the lunar surface and we need more things brought to the party on the lunar surface. There'll be more opportunities. The European Space Agency, we've agreed to fly three. 3 Europeans will fly. We've already agreed on it. 3 Europeans will fly on the Orion spacecraft to the gateway, to the lunar, to the space station orbiting the moon. We have no agreements yet about operating on the lunar surface. It's not because we don't want to create them. It's we have to create the legal framework to cooperate on the lunar surface. Whose laws will how will we deal with the legal issues of operating on the lunar surface? We had to create that framework first. After we create that framework, then we will start to make agreements on who's going to the lunar surface. But today we have agreements that Canada will fly one astronaut, and it'll be on this first mission. They were able to negotiate on the first mission. And then Artemis 4 will be a European Space Agency astronaut. Artemis 5 will be a European Space Agency astronaut. And then some other mission we haven't defined yet.
Well, first of all, good morning. I want to know something about the time and the training that the people and the astronauts need to achieve and perform missions like that. So I don't know if you can tell us something about related, the training, different techniques, especially the time that a person like that needs to achieve that. I don't know if you can tell us something about this.
Yeah, I can give you the rough numbers. So when you are selected as an astronaut, as a NASA astronaut, and I'm sure the other space agencies have similar time frames, but if you're selected as an astronaut, we call you an astronaut candidate. And it takes about a year of training to get through that candidacy period and complete the basic training required in order to be assigned to a mission. Prior to that 1 year, you will not be assigned to a mission. You have to have the 1 year of basic astronaut training before you get assigned. Now, we typically like to assign our crews for a particular mission about 2 years in advance. So we have just announced the Artemis 2 crew back in March, I think. And we're targeting launch in November of next year. So it will be less than 2 years, but just less than 2 years. And that's our goal, is to give the astronauts about 2 years to train for their mission. That enables you to get the specific training that you need. Now, the culture of training is very different. When I joined NASA in the space shuttle program, when we were flying the space shuttle and docking to the Russian space station Mir, we were practicing, and it was a culture change for NASA. NASA, we would train our astronauts to fly 2-week missions on the space shuttle. And so you, as an astronaut, would train a very specific mission, 2 weeks, and almost every hour was known what you would be doing. And you would train for those specific tasks. You will be doing this experiment, you'll be flying this, you'll be doing this particular rendezvous and docking scenario. You'll be extracting this particular payload with a robotic arm, and you have to learn how to use the robotic arm and attach the payload to the space station. Very, very specific. The Russians had been flying their space stations for a long time. The Mir space station before that was the Saudi space station. And they would train on skills. They wouldn't train particular tasks. They would train skills, and mostly only skills. Like, this is how you operate a robotic arm. This is how you generically fly and do a rendezvous and docking. Not how you do this specific rendezvous and this particular specific docking, but in very general skills. And it was a culture change for NASA to switch over, because when you're on the space station for 6 months, you can't train every exact task that you will have to do. So we focused on training the skills. And that was a culture shift for us.
Sorry, Lieutenant Perez, as you know. You had a slide that you talked about some close to 38,000 uplink commands that you send up to the space station. With a crew of 4 people, how much is the crew really involved in the mission aspect of it, and how much is it actually being automated from the command center?
Yeah, like many things today, it's highly automated. It's highly automated. The crew is trained to take over in case things aren't going as planned. And as we build, certainly the early missions, they will be highly trained in flying the spacecraft. And there are, on this mission, we didn't talk about it, but we did have one particular failure, that the electrical system, there's these circuit breakers that kept opening, and so the power would shut off, not on the whole system, but on part of it. And if that happens when you're behind the moon, it has to be the crew that does that. And so there are some times where only the crew can do it, and we certainly will be training the crew on those specific tasks or skills. But lots of the phase of flight is now automated, and the crew follows and tracks and makes sure that the systems are going as planned. And this is a big dilemma, right? And with self-driving cars will be the same thing. Self-driving cars is the same thing. And we say, well, I'll be driving or I'll let the car drive. And if the car has a problem, I'll take over. Well, that's okay for all of us, because all of us, we have lots of, many hours, thousands and thousands of hours behind the wheel. You guys will have thousands of hours at the stick or at the rudder controlling the aircraft. But as self-driving cars come about, people will get less and less experience driving. And so how are they supposed to, in the moment of an emergency, take over? It's, your skills are less, and yet it's needed less. And so it's quite a dilemma. We have that same problem with spaceflight. You don't want to automate it too much. You automate it too much, and the astronauts don't maintain their skills.
Okay, Mr. Howard, making justice to the Artemis program, we are going to the moon together. I have to thank you very, very much for coming here to the Spanish Air Force Academy, and especially because you have been able to allow all of us to fly from the Earth to the moon today, here from moon, without moving from the conference room. So thank you very much. It's very interesting for us. I hope to have the opportunity to receive again here in San Javier. Thank you. As you can see, the Marmero is the New York. Okay, thank you very much.